right, I have something special for everyone today. It's officially the off season for the Pacers, but the run to the Eastern Conference Finals opened the door for me to do something I've always wanted to do, which is sit with a coach and discuss the subtle details of a set or an action. As you may recall, ahead of Game 4 against Boston, Rick Carlisle took the opportunity during his media availability to credit one of his assistants for coming up with a really creative end-of-game play, which the internet very lovingly took to referring to as the quote-unquote four vertical set. So without further ado, I'm joined by the architect of that play, Pacers assistant coach, Jenny Boucek. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, I just kind of want to know from you, like, what's the backstory on how you came to draw inspiration from this? I know that Rick mentioned it was from playing flag football however many years ago.
Yeah, my playing career ended young because I broke my sacrum. So I stopped playing in the WNBA very young. I didn't have competition out of my blood yet, and I wasn't very obedient to the medical people. And so I kind of snuck off and started playing flag football down there, which was extremely serious. Like football in Florida, it was serious. Like I got asked to try out for this flag football team. I met this woman playing pickup basketball named Anita Marks. Little did I know this was a big thing there, and we were playing tournaments like against teams from all over the country, New York, LA, Chicago, and she was the best quarterback. She's actually in media now in New York doing a lot of things for ESPN, etc. But she was a stud, and she and a lot of the other women were playing professional tackle football down there in Miami, and in their off season they were playing flag football, and it was 4-on-4. I was fortunate enough to make the team. I was a wide receiver. Anita took it seriously. We had a playbook, and you had 3 on the line of scrimmage and the quarterback. They were all eligible receivers, and we had a playbook with all these routes to try to get people open. And it was a blast. I ended up breaking my sacrum again, so it was not a long-term thing for me. And Ron Rothstein, the head coach of the Soul, said, if I catch you playing flag football again, you're fired. So, but in that short time that I played, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And years later, Sue Bird and I were always just shooting the breeze about basketball. We still do. Like, that's my basketball soulmate. And she's very bright, very creative. And one day we were just chatting and we started talking about some of those routes that we used to run and could it be translatable to a basketball situation. And that's kind of the genesis of this play was from flag football, from shooting the breeze with Sue. And then I kind of presented it to our staff a year or so ago. And we put some guys out there, offense, defense, and we played around with some different routes. And Mike Weiner ended up getting put in charge of special situations this year, and he had it in the playbook. And so you saw it a few times, and you saw it there in the Eastern Conference Finals.
So did you ever run this with the Storm when you were the head coach there with Sue Bird?
We never did, and she saw us run it in the finals, and she's blowing my phone up like, "Oh my God, you ran it! It worked! I loved it!" And then Megan Rapinoe, I guess, asked her, "Did y'all ever run it with the Storm?" And Sue's like, "No, I don't know why." And then she's texting me, "Why didn't we?" I'm like, "I don't know. It was still kind of in the hopper, it was in the formulating stage. I wasn't really sure it would work, and we never really played around with it. So it was just in theory at that stage." But credit to Mike Weiner, because he's the one that actually had the guts to believe that it could work and put it into action.
How much of it, too, is that because a lot of the motion's occurring before they hand the ball to the inbound passer? Like, is that a pretty big key of it, and the fact that you're getting that vertical acceleration ahead of when, the quote-unquote snap actually occurs when the ball was being handed to Nembhard in that situation?
I think the big idea behind it, like conceptually, was just a way to use the entire court. Usually those sets to get it for a need 3 are half court. You're seeing some, I don't know what you refer to with the blast action with somebody coming from the backcourt for a little bit of need 2, maybe need 3, but it was just the first thing was use the whole court,
right.
The momentum of the whole court, that space and momentum to create an open shot. But then the next thing was, and I know you've dug into this a lot, but just like the go screen, blur screen, where with all the switching that we see, especially in a set situation,
right.
a need situation, like the percentages of getting a good shot across the league for years for need 3, need 2 are abysmal. And the points per shot in those situations are really bad. So it's like, why not try something different? Because what's been done and what's being done around the league with the best coaches in the world, best players in the world, is not generating very good shots. So there really was no reason not to try something new. And so using the concept of, do we switch, do we not switch with the blur action off the ball?
Right.
Was another big principle with it.
Especially in into game situations, because I don't know the numbers on it, but it seems like most teams go to a switch everything scheme. So if you can create that type of confusion like we saw in that play against Boston, it makes a big difference. But I've gone through, I think that you guys ran like 600 sideline out of bounds plays this year, but I've gone through to try to find the examples of this. And what I found when I did it chronologically was it was really cool how it all came together by the time you ran that in the Eastern Conference Finals. So are you willing to let me pull these up on the screen and look at them with me? I kind of want to.
You know it more intimately than I do.
Okay, so here we go. The first time that I noticed you guys getting into this formation was actually in Pascal Siakam's first game up in Portland. I don't know if you can see the score, but I think you guys are down 5 there, and there's roughly 4.7 seconds to go. So Andrew Nemhard wasn't available. He didn't play for you guys on this back-to-back against Sacramento and up in Portland. So obviously he's not the inbound passer. So kind of the first question that I want to get into is, because this was Pascal's first game, was it a consideration for you guys that, like, I'm guessing he probably didn't have any practices with you when you were out on the West Coast? So were you kind of thinking like, let's use him as the inbound passer because maybe he doesn't know all of our sets and plays quite yet? Or what was the thinking there?
I honestly, I can't even really remember. We do talk in depth as a staff about our end of game stuff. And so it's a collaborative effort, like who's going to inbounds, who's going to be in what spots. And as the playoffs get closer, we start getting more specific about if we're going to need 2 or if we're going to need 3. Like, it's been predetermined pretty much what play we're going to run, short clock, etc. So this one like I said, I was doing defense this year, and Mike Weiner and Lloyd were doing more of the offense, and Mike Weiner and Rick were really focused on the special situations. So it'd more be a question for him why he chose Pascal or why they chose Pascal in this situation. But it very well could be what you're saying, like he hadn't had a chance to run through this, and because it's a little bit different, there's some timing and some nuances into making it work. So obviously we want him on the court, and utilizing somebody with size that can see as an inbounder is always helpful.
Yeah, because in this case, I think the inbounds passer, because it is a 2-possession game, ends up playing it a little bit loose. But the next thing that kind of pops off is Miles is already running that middle route, rim to rim, really early ahead of the snap by comparison to what you did in the Eastern Conference Finals. Is there, something different there maybe because the defense is playing further off? Because obviously I'm guessing Portland here is thinking like they just don't want to foul a 3-point shooter because it is, a 5-point differential. But Miles is definitely, already down there in the restricted area before Pascal even has the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuances in this play to make it work. And to be honest with you, it I think took us some time to understand all of those. We joke around with our guys because every athlete thinks they can play other sports and maybe like had ambitions of playing other sports and maybe played for a little while. So we would joke with them a lot about like who actually played football and knows how to do this kind of thing. So the timing, the nuances, how to create the confusion, I think it took us some reps, and it's hard to simulate in practice what teams are going to do in games,
right?
Run these things live, again, because it's not been done, like hard to anticipate exactly how teams are going to play it. So it took us some time to, I think, figure out some of the subtleties.
Yeah, because Buddy's still here in this one, and up until this point, Buddy was your most frequent, non-contact ghost screener. So you have him on the outside route. They're trying to create that confusion. Obviously, Portland's playing further back, and to get that angle for Tyrese and then the inbound passer, like this ends up being a double team. And that's why I liked watching these so much in sequential order, because then I noticed you guys ran this again when you ended up being in Brooklyn at the end of the season. You're down 4 in this case with 7 seconds to go. And there's been a switch, like you said, probably a good question to ask Mike at some point, where now because Nemhard is available and he's a starter at this point in time, he is the inbound passer. And now you have Pascal as the release valve there. And Miles wasn't available in this game either. I think he had injured either a knee or an ankle in the prior game against Brooklyn. So Obi Toppin's running the middle route is kind of the 5. And because Brooklyn's playing you guys tighter, Obi takes off at that point in time. And then that's kind of what I want to ask too, is like the timing element of this, because you have all 5 starters on the floor minus Miles, if I back that up a little bit. Like, how do you perfect the timing for the brush screener? Or like even in some of you guys' half court sets, like, is there a specific cue for that? Like, whose job is it? Like, is Aaron supposed to be going early so that Tyrese doesn't have to kind of slow his step? Or are you wanting him to cut in front of Tyrese's defender's face? Or like, how do you master the timing of something like that, especially from a teaching aspect?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to give away everything because hopefully we continue to evolve this concept. You know, we have a lot of different routes that we played with. Like, we want to have this alignment where those 3 guys are basically at the line of scrimmage and we do different routes off of it. In fact, I contacted Anita for the playbook, you know, for our playbook for the 4-on-4, because we want to keep playing around with the concepts and running different routes to create confusion. But in terms of like creating that confusion versus the switch, non-switch, on ball, off ball, it's very much a feel thing. And it's very much like, it's something that you have to work on. It's a chemistry thing. And it's also just like, you know, understanding the defense and reading the defense and how they're playing it and listening for whether they're calling switch or not, because teams are getting more sophisticated both on offense and defense with this action. It's more happening on ball. So you're trying to same concepts that we're teaching and working on and feeling out on the on ball blur action and applying that to the off ball. But like I said, we don't have a chance to practice this very often live where we're going against a defense that doesn't doing. And so a lot of this practice is coming in the games. And I think you saw that why it got better throughout the season, because we were using these situations as practice. Like, we're down 4 here.
Right.
And that's the other thing that's different is like when you're down 2 possessions, you know, the defense doesn't always know whether you're going for a 2 or a 3. And so how they play things a little different as opposed to when they know you're going for a 3.
Right, because you could tell Brooklyn here tries to zone it up a little bit. Mikal Bridges is playing further off. There was some communication between the center and Dennis Schroeder to kind of play off a little bit as well. And you could tell they were trying to anticipate which directions people were going to go. But you can still see, like, Pascal's getting a shot there. And then, like, for him, as being the release valve as the trailer, he obviously has a lot of height to be able to shoot over the top of somebody as well, even if you don't get something off the initial action, which ends up being the case here. Missed shot, but still gets an attempt over his defender.
Yeah, and it's hard to get somebody wide open,
right,
with their best defender, set defense, you know, that kind of thing. And so the goal, I think, is to create confusion and try to create some kind of closeout where you either, you know, can get off a good shot, or you can create a closeout where you can shot fake and, you know, sidestep into a clean look. Because, like I said, if you look at the numbers, which you ever will, it's really hard to get good shots in these situations.
So then we go to Boston, because these are the 3 times that I remember seeing it. And obviously Boston knows that you guys need a 3. You're down 3 in this situation. Less time, 1.7 seconds. And Boston, by comparison to the prior 2 teams, has put their center onto Nembhard. And Al Horford's playing Nembhard a lot tighter and trying to impact his visibility. And then the timing here is pretty much perfection, especially from Doug, to create that confusion that you're referencing. So really cool to kind of see that progression from the season of these guys, especially in Doug's case, because I'm assuming he probably got subbed in because he has experience as a brush screener and can be a decoy. And he hadn't even played in the 4th quarter to this point. So to get the timing as good as it was here, especially with how much everybody else is being jammed, and to be able to get the clean shot where Drew actually has to come off of Miles in order to contest that in the corner, like, it just, to me, it's even more special once you see it in sequential order.
Well, and you see Doug open as well.
Right.
So, you know, I think the other thing that you're seeing in a lot of need 3s is trying to use the whole court. So it used to be the 2 hot spots in need 3s were the corner and the top. And a lot of plays that you see need 3 are getting you one and then the other. But you're seeing Miami and some other teams like really take advantage of the skip pass, because there's a whole half of the floor that hasn't been utilized in need 3 situations. So if you can like I said, have some type of alignment where you're doing different things out of it. You're creating confusion. Are we switching? Are we not? Even if they have a premeditated plan of are we switching? Are we not? You can create the confusion to screw that up, and then have multiple options using as much of the floor as you can. I think that's about as good as you're going to be able to do as a coach.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, you can see there that Doug has both hands raised where he could have been available as well. Of course, Nembhard might have been a little bit obscured there since he is being, like I said, guarded by the center, where in the prior cases the other two teams were using guards there. But still, like, to get that many options in an into game set that would have been clean and just giving a guy an opportunity to be able to make a shot, pretty cool to watch all that play back out. But I also want to talk on something that you touched on there. Like, do you think that this overall concept of like the pre-snap motion and using the full length of the floor could be applied even more into other situations too? Like, not even necessarily into game plays or sideline out of bounds plays, but maybe extending common actions that you would run into the half court to give guys a little bit more of a running start into them?
Yeah, I think you're already seeing that. I mean, you'll notice, Rick, I did this as a head coach too. Like, a lot of times when we call timeout, when we have the ball just within the flow of the game, we call it in the backcourt instead of like where
Right.
dribble over and you call a timeout. Well, that's for the same reason. So you're able to come in and run something with momentum.
Also, like, is this something too where it might be an advantage of why sometimes you guys wouldn't advance the ball? Like, it might be to your advantage coming out of a timeout not to.
Yeah, you're talking end of game now.
Yeah.
So I mean, definitely that was my philosophy as a head coach when we had time to do it. I don't want to speak for Rick, but I think you'll see us doing that quite a bit, because you want that momentum. It's so hard to create space to get off a clean shot, and if you can use momentum and pace, which we do just philosophically in general, that's
right.
for trying to create opportunities to do that even in a set situation we want to do.
Because Rick also mentioned when he was talking about this ahead of Game 4 that he had said that Nick Nurse talked about this at a clinic that he did from his time in Toronto, because he went and watched the Argonauts, the Canadian Football League team, play. And up in Canadian football, there's not the same rules about having to be set before the snap. Obviously, everybody behind the line of scrimmage can be moving. I think up there they call it waggle-like motion. And I was looking through it because Nick doesn't often give a lot about like his offensive philosophy and pressers, but he did have a comment in November of 2022 where he said that he and his staff had gone to one of the Canadian Football League games there in Toronto, and that he wanted to apply that to more of their like dead ball situations and what you're referencing. Like, I wanted to show you just like this one example, like not necessarily in their team concept or with their players, but just as a concept in general, that like, this isn't even right out of a sideline out of bounds play, but it's like what you're talking about, going the full length of the floor, that as soon as Fred crosses half court, they're already, quote unquote, breaking into like what's traditionally thought of as like wide action, which would somewhat a lot of times be more stagnant, where it might be, just at half court going and setting a flat cross screen for the weak side player to cut to the ball. But they're getting more momentum out of that downhill because they set it early, and with the guy being able to run that route. I think in addition to that, like beyond the vertical acceleration, when they ran this like 4 times in a row to close this game, and you can see there that OG, when he's coming off that pin down, like because he has that extra length and the momentum, that he can also, it's not just about like not being jammed by the defense, but also that you can kind of fake that in and out and potentially go run a different route and go to a different option. So there, rather than, using that momentum to go around the curl, he can use it to go to the in and out and go to the post up and get a different option. And by the end of the game, they ended up running it one more time, and they didn't get quite the same momentum. It was more in the half court where it was just traditional wide, and you could kind of see the difference from Dallas's defense, where he doesn't get anything out of the initial curl, and then it ended up having to be more of an isolation type play. So it's like, even when you look at like most teams in the NBA run wide and run variations of wide, but like just looking at how much value there is from extending what could be a half court play to a 3/4 court play.
No, you're nailing it. I mean, I think we're all, it's, this is nothing unique to us. We're all trying to figure out how to use space, how to create momentum, how to put pressure on the rim, because that's what generates the highest percentage shots, both at the rim, free throw, at the three-point line. And so we're all trying to learn how to do that better. There's a lot of coaches that I know. Like I know Eric Spoelstra, he studied Oregon football when they were running their high octane offenses, and we're all trying to learn from other sports. I told Megan Rapinoe last time we had a wine night, like I want to really nail you down and try to figure out if there's some things we can use from high level soccer and incorporate those concepts. So we're all trying to figure it out, and we can all learn from other sports because there's kids all around the world that are tinkering with similar concepts in these attack sports.
And once Rick had mentioned that, I kind of wondered, was this like a conversation that you guys ever had, like with Pascal, since this is something you were incorporating and it was something that Rick said he had heard Nick talk about as well with the Raptors? Was Pascal like, oh, hey, like this is cool and this is something that I'm used to doing?
I don't think we talked specifically with him about the football concepts and stuff like that, but I think he obviously is very comfortable with creative concepts and concepts that are trying to get you to the rim. Because I mean, that's what Toronto's whole offense has been based on, getting to the rim and the downhill.
I guess my last question was, I mean, you kind of answered it, but like when you guys are in kind of the end of game situations in the huddle, like, is this something that you pretty much have to plan in advance? Like these are our handfuls of plays, and these are the ones that we going up against this opponent feel most comfortable with for this game context?
Yeah, I don't know that every coach does that. Like when I worked for Dave Yeager, it was one of the best I'd been around at out plays and plays. And, it seemed that he pulled some of those just out of his hat that none of us had ever seen before. And he was a genius. And so the obvious advantage to that is that the defense and the opposing coaches who are so sophisticated in their scouting wouldn't know what was coming. But you have to have a team that's capable of doing that, take stuff off the board that they've never seen before. Not every team can do that. And then other coaches, I think Rick's a little bit more premeditated. He wants to work on these things, that we are prepared and everybody's comfortable with what we're doing. And so, like I said, especially as the season goes along, I think we're a lot more premeditated about what we're running. But then Rick always reserves the right to switch and audible and run something that we hadn't talked about. And that's part of Rick's very prepared, but he got really good in-game.
And I think that's kind of like that exact philosophy is what showed up in the 3 clips that I showed. Like, yeah, you might have the element of surprise with the opponent, but the fact that you guys had done that earlier in the season and that you do know what the sets are, it came together at the exact moment you needed it to, even though the shot didn't necessarily fall against Boston. So,
yeah, I mean, as the season goes along, we learn more about what's good for our team, what's best for our team too, because every little piece, you learn like who's better in those situations, and it's not as simple as what you think. There are some guys, they're great shooters, but they give plays away because they're too fancy. They can't wait on the screen and the timing, and so find they're better as a decoy than the primary, objective because of their antsiness and their lack of savviness. The inbounder, who's taking it out, you'd be amazed how much time we spend on who's going to be the best guy to do that, because you're talking about need situations in the game, maybe possibly in the playoffs, a do or die game. And you look at sports science, and when the pressure's on, if a guy is not able to manage anxiety, their vision literally shrinks and they can't see and scan the floor as well. So a guy that's cool under pressure and their vision is going to stay open, and can also just see because of their physical stature, like there's a lot of nuances to who's where and when, and you learn that over time.
Is there a way to replicate that, like what you referenced before? Like, it's hard to replicate these plays at practice because everybody at practice knows the plays. But like, how do you replicate some of those like high stress situations as best you can to test that and to know like who you want inbounding the ball? Does it just come from what you observe in games, or?
Yep. I think that with those situations where it's like pressure free throws, I've always thought they should have a different stat for like your free throw percentage and your pressure free throw situation, because it's amazing how different it is for a lot of players. They could be a great free throw shooter, get in the clutch, and there's a decline, and it could be the opposite. I've coached players that aren't great free throw shooters in practice, or you put the game on the line and their percentage actually goes way up. And so it's hard to replicate pressure. We try, but there's nothing like game pressure. There just isn't. And there's different levels of game pressure depending on the game and depending on the season.
And that's kind of the value of how far you guys went into the playoffs, right, too, especially with how young of a roster you have. You have even more to draw from and to go build off of headed into next season and more learning experience to go from.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, look, like, you know, if you've been around the game a long time, you've been around players a long time, you have a sense that this guy's got the it factor. But it's only proven in those clutch situations where he gets an opportunity to show, like, he loves those moments. He's born for those moments, and he thrives in those moments. But how can you know that for sure unless it's tested? And it's not always going to be tested when it's not your, normal first option. And so there were some blessings in disguise from, like, Tyrese going down and different things where we got to see, like, this kid's got it.
Well, I enjoyed the playoff run almost as much as this conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed listening to Jenny's insights. I think that she's brilliant. The first time that I actually knew of you was because I heard you on the Slap and Glass podcast when you were talking about some Spain pick and rolls and how you implemented that both with Sue Bird and Luca. So that's why I knew that at some point I wanted to be able to have a conversation with you about offense, or in this case, maybe sometime at a later point, since you were more in charge of the defense this year, we could have another conversation along those lines as well. But I really appreciate that you were willing to go this in depth with everything and give some insights into a play that the internet sincerely loved when they saw it in live action in the Eastern Conference Finals. I knew I had seen it before, but I think a lot of people got introduced, just like to the Pacers as a team, to that play as well.
Well, I mean, a lot, give the credit to Rick too, because as long as he's been coaching, as successful as he's been, you don't see players with that, or coaches with that resume, that are as innovative and open-minded as he is. And that's why he's so great, because he's always evolving as a leader, as a man, as a human being, as a friend, and as a coach. And so, he's not set in his ways, and he's open to trying stuff like this on the biggest stage, under the biggest mic. So a lot of credit goes to him. He's got big courage. He's got a big brain. He's got a lot of trust. And that's why he's a brilliant leader and coach and amazing to work for.
And I think just from the little observations that I've had of you guys and everything that you've just said here in terms of him being willing to do that, Mike being in charge of special situations, you having the inspiration of this idea and studying other sports and incorporating it, that's very collaborative. And that's my biggest takeaway of every time I've been around any of you or spoken to any of you, that it's a very collaborative staff, and I think that's pretty cool too. Thank you very much for your time. I don't want to take up a ton of your time. I know it's the off season for you and you're having a little vacation trip. So thanks for stopping by and making this a crossover of Basketball She Wrote and Basketball She Coached.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.